everyone. This is the March 21st, 2023 meeting of the Finance. First day of spring. Welcome to the springtime in Santa Barbara. It is raining. All right, so first, can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, Committee Member Gutierrez is not present. Committee Member Harmon?
Here.
Committee Chair Friedman?
Here. All right, we do have a quorum. So first, I will open it up to general public comment. Is there any comment for items not on today's agenda but under the purview of the Finance Committee? Is there anybody in the audience here for general public comment? Not seeing any. Is there any member of the public online?
Chair Friedman, there are no hands raised at this time.
Okay, so I will close general public comment. And then before we turn it over and start our item for today, for those in the room, if you do want to make a comment, you will need to fill out one of these, and you can just hand it over to Mr. DeMartini over there, on there. And then I'll make an announcement for those online once we start public comment. Then I'll close public comment on there. So we'll go through the presentation. I'll make an announcement of when the last public comment could go online. So we'll turn it over to Mr. DeMartini. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. So the one agenda item for today is to discuss staff's proposal for the short-term rental enforcement pilot program. I'm going to turn it over to the City Attorney, Ms. Connect, who will take the bulk of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeMartini and Chair Friedman and members of the Finance Committee. First off, I'd like to introduce the City Attorney team and the Finance Department team that's presenting this item today. And first of all, I'd like to introduce Mr. Denny Way, who's our City Attorney, Assistant City Attorney Prosecutor. Next to him is Mr. William.
I'm sorry, Ms. Connect. We just want to make sure your mic is on.
It's on? Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
So, Mr. Denny Way, who's the City Attorney, Assistant City Prosecutor, who will be handling the prosecution as we go forward with this item. Next to him is Mr. William Avila, who's the City Attorney Investigator, and then Mr. John Doidness, who handled the original enforcement program in 2015 when we started this program. And between these three gentlemen, they know so much more about short-term vacation rentals in Santa Barbara that they are a wealth of information to answer your questions. So, and then the finance team that's also been instrumental in putting this together, Mr. DeMartini, and the Assistant City Finance Director, Miss Lindsay Moss, who's sitting behind me, and she'll be helping with the presentation today. So the agenda, advance the slide, for this morning is first we're going to do an overview of the short-term rentals existing in the city of Santa Barbara. We're going to talk a little bit about the 2015 short-term rental enforcement program. Then we're going to go to a little bit about the Cracky case and how that impacted the enforcement program that we were engaging in 2015. Then we're going to go into, wow. I guess it wasn't on. So, thank you. Then we're going to switch and talk about the pilot program and that we're recommending and going to present to you today. Those program goals, the costs, and the assumptions. Then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Moss, who's going to talk about transient occupancy, tax collection, and then we'll switch to your questions, public comment, and discussion. So next slide, please. So the request to the Finance Committee today would be that the committee consider and recommend to the City Council to adopt a resolution to appropriate funds for the development of a short-term rental enforcement pilot program directed by the City Attorney's Office and the Finance Department. Next slide. So short-term rentals. A rental is any dwelling unit to any person for the exclusive transient use of less than 30 days that is not located in a zone permitted for hotels and has not been permitted for that use. Want to make that clear. STRs are not permitted in most areas of Santa Barbara. There are some areas that do permit hotels, and if those uses do get permitted, then they're allowed in both the inland and coastal areas. So the policy issue is because short-term rentals are generally more lucrative than short-term rentals, their existence compounds the existing city housing crisis. And also, as you know, they're incompatible with most they create compatibility issues with a lot of Santa Barbara neighborhoods. And as you know, they've really created an issue with regard to, the loss of long-term rentals in the city. So there are legal hotels and there are legal short-term vacation rentals in permitted zones in both the inland areas and the coastal areas, but not many. The process to get a legal short-term rental in those areas of the city that permit them is difficult. And Mr. Isaacson could tell you about how many there are that are permitted within the city at this time. Next slide, please. This is the slide. So in 2015, the city started a short-term rental enforcement program. Then that was started after the development of the platform listing companies such as Airbnb and many others. There was a significant increase of short-term rentals in the city at that time. The city council allocated about $170,000 to that program, to the Community Development Department and the City Attorney's Office for the enforcement. The funding for both the civil and administrative process was insignificant and really inefficient to curb illegal short-term rentals. At that time, we did not have a criminal enforcement division in the city attorney's office, so we were processing these through administrative fines and the administrative process. So it was very time-consuming and not efficient. And it also ended up in 2 litigation cases. So we ended up shifting our forces, next slide please, to defending against both of those 2 cases, the Cracky case and the Santa Barbara Inland case. As you're well aware, the Cracky case, which we ended up litigating for a number of years, ended up requiring us to go back to the pre-2015 enforcement status, where we can only enforce in the coastal zone based upon nuisance-based complaints. So we still do allow short-term rentals to become registered, and we still do at that point collect TOTs, T-bid payments, and business licenses. But if we do get nuisance-based complaints on those short-term rentals, we do come in and do criminal prosecutions against those short-term rentals, at which point they are obligated to close down. That would be the same protocol we would use if we do go forward with this program we're proposing today. In the inland area, we were successful in defending against our ordinance, which prohibits short-term rentals, through the Santa Barbara Inland and Coastal Property Association case, and therefore we're allowed to proactively enforce in the non-coastal areas. Next slide. So the program goals for this one-year pilot program that we're proposing would be to actually determine the true number of short-term rentals in the city today. And that's not actually an easy thing to do. We've had actually 2 proposals come in for these companies that we're calling these stripping companies that actually, go out and they search through the database, the platforms, VRBO, and there's, the number of the listing online listing companies. They search for them, they come up with the number of listings, but there's duplicates. They're very good at being kind of evasive, so it's very difficult to actually ascertain an accurate number of operating short-term rentals in the city. So that's the first goal of the program, is to determine number of nights, rates, and location. Once we get accurate data, the next goal is to develop cases and start enforcing. So ultimately what our goal would be in the inland area, achieve permanent compliance with illegal short-term rentals, shut them down. in the coastal zone, achieve compliance in accordance with the parameters of the Cracky case. So in other words, go back to pre-2015, which is what I talked about earlier. Also, in the inland zone, in the few cases where, in the few areas, zones in the inland area where hotels are allowed, and there are operating STRs, if they want to get permitted, start operating, start paying TOT. Otherwise, shut down. In the coastal zone, as I said, nuisance complaints, then we prosecute, shut down. There are no nuisances, then they get registered, start paying TOT. Those are our overall overarching goals of this program. So next slide, please. Oh, you got that, sorry. Pilot program costs. And there's just to kind of lay the foundation here, there's really a broad swath and a wide-ranging cost here because it's very difficult for us to actually estimate what the costs are going to be. And the amount of funds that are allocated to this program will really dictate the success of the program. We put a little amount of funds towards the program, a little general fund allocation to the program. We're going to have slow roll and slow prosecution. It's going to take us a long time. We will achieve some success, but it'll be a slower rollout. Very, very difficult to determine what that element of success will be. What we have developed is an aggressive approach for this first one-year pilot program. The first part of the program will be, as we have indicated, to retain one of these to retain one of these companies that does the stripping, and get an accurate estimate, accurate data as to the number of operating short-term rentals out there. So this company, we've had a range from about $100,000 to $450,000 for a contract, and the difference will be what services we want to engage with in that. The next and the most really important critical phase of this will be investigators on the ground. So we need boots on the ground to actually, based on the data that we receive, to go out and gather the hard evidence. Hard evidence is critical then in order to be able to prosecute the cases that come later. So, and we could do that through either hiring outside private investigator firms, or we could hire hourly retired police officers. That's why there's a wide range. So it either would be $175 to $200 an hour or $50 to $70 an hour, depending on which way we go. But we can't do it internally within the city attorney's office because we just don't have the resources, so we have to hire outside. They would be under the supervision of Mr. Avila, who's a seasoned investigator. He will have to monitor their work, give the assignments, at least for if we do with hourly retired police officer investigators. If we hire private investigator firms, they will be under their own control. So there's a big differential there. And then the next part of the program will be the actual criminal prosecution of the short-term rentals. We will be doing that within the city attorney's office. We'll be allocating a 0.5 prosecutor. We've just retained a new deputy city attorney, which will be allocating half of her time to this program if it goes forward. Obviously, this will require shifting priorities within the city attorney's office to make that attorney available for this program. We also are asking for $125,000 in order to hire some outside legal counsel for overflow work, or in case we have more complicated legal cases that we need to prosecute or defend against during this program. So, we will need some extra city attorney funds for this program, and also significant administrative costs because we have to really monitor the expenses and the cases and the outflow of this program. miscellaneous costs $10,000 to $15,000. So there's a lot of costs, there's a big differential, hard to really estimate what those costs are going to be at this time. You know, and as I said, the amount of funds that come into the program will really dictate the success or failure of the program. But you know, in order to do this, it's going to take funds. Overall, what we estimate for the 12-month pilot program would be a range of about 700,000 low end to about 1.4 million high end. And again, the variance is attributed to the number of illegal short-term rentals that are operating out there, which we really at this point don't have a good handle on. And of course, the first phase of the program is getting the data to determine what that actual number is. You know, we just don't have complete data. We have staffing constraints, so we need to hire outside in order to be able to backfill the staffing. And then part of the program will just be to analyze the costs to determine what a permanent program would look like, and then figure out what those in-house staffing needs will be if we continue the program at on a longer basis. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Moss, who's going to talk more about what we could look at in terms of vacation rental, it's TOT payments and business license payments, and then put that together with the revenue. But one thing I want to stress is that when we talk about criminal enforcement, the goal is to gain compliance with the zoning laws and you know, stopping operations, not revenue generation. So those two have to be really kept separate. But you know, once TOT payments are made, those monies go into the general fund and can be used to backfill supporting this program going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Connect. I have to say she took about 90% of my bullet points talking through the expenses, so I'll do my best to add some new information for you about the pilot program revenues and expenses that we did put together as a part of this report for the council here. So we're looking at just a 12-month-long short-term rental enforcement pilot program. This specific slide is on the one-time only revenues and expenses. And as Ms. Connect pointed out many times, which was going to be my big point here, is how difficult it was to create these estimates, especially on the revenue side. Both the coastal and the inland past due taxes are very difficult for us to calculate at this time based on the limited information we received from those two different vendors. They provided us proposals with estimates of how many STRs there are out there, and they varied widely. So we took an estimate of, okay, one saying there's more, one saying there's less, and then we used those assumptions to continue to create additional assumptions as to what our revenues could be, scaling back based on the information we received from the city attorneys, specifically on the coastal STR past due taxes. There's very little chance that we'll be able to collect very much because it's the nuisance-based complaints only that we would be doing the criminal prosecution for. So those dollar amounts of revenues on the coastal are very low on the 15,000 to 30,000 high end, and that's specific to the assumption that we use to really bring those revenues down, knowing that it would only be nuisance-based complaints that they would be moving forward with on criminal prosecution on those. Now on the inland STRs, it's a different dynamic where they would be moving forward with, you know, a large majority, but how many, we don't know. It's a two-part issue. One, of how many are really out there, and additionally, how many can this team handle in a 12-month time period? How much would they really get through in that time? And then how many collections would we be receiving right off the bat in that 1-year time period? I also want to point out that we are talking about 3 different types of taxes or assessments that we used in these assumptions. The Transit Occupancy Tax, which is a 12% tax. The Tourism Business Improvement District Assessment, or TBID, that's 2%. And then the Business License Tax as well. So these were all factored into the assumptions that are shown here. Another piece, the big piece of the assumption we used in that second one on the inland STR past due taxes is an assumption that we would be using a vendor to do the collections, and they take a 35% fee. So it's quite a large reduction in the revenues we would receive if we do go that route. Now that jumps me into the expenses. That first line item on the expenses also has a wide range. Ms. Connect touched on this, but I'll add a little bit more details about why the range of $100,000 to $450,000. So the proposal we received from one vendor to provide services for us to identify STRs, do the auditing, helping with compliance. It also included really more of a full service platform where they would do the payment processing for us, similar to what's happening with our business license platform now, where they take on all of the billing, the collections, et cetera. If we wanted to go for that option, that's the $450,000 option. That's why the price goes up considerably. We're undecided yet on which option we would take, and this is the information we had at this time to provide to City Council, that those are our two scenarios, that we could either do the low-cost option where finance is doing that processing in-house, or have the full-service option where the vendor handles all the remittance and collection. The next few Ms. Connect really covered in great detail, so I don't want to spend much time on those. Those few items, the $612,000 to $712,000 range for hiring the investigators, the hourlies, and then doing the prosecution, she covered all of that. So you can see here that the range on the one-time expenses ranges from $947,000 to $1.4 million. And I also want to give a big disclaimer that these numbers are all very rough. We did the low and the high range, but we still could be not hitting the mark perfectly on some of these. That's that one. Thank you. This is sort of a refresher slide to again hit on the big parts that Ms. Connect pointed out earlier, that the primary goal of this pilot program can't be the collection of the unpaid business license taxes and TOT taxes. Really the focus of this program is on deterring the activity itself. I also want to give a little refresher on the transient occupancy tax itself. The transient occupancy tax is the 12% tax. However, 10% of it goes to the unrestricted general fund, whereas 2% of it goes to Creeks. We haven't talked about that a lot, but just a reminder that Creeks would be getting their portion, the 2%, as a part of this, and they would receive some revenue as well. So we didn't go into detail on that in the council agenda report, but we do expect that they would receive their 2%. So that's restricted to the Creeks restoration and water quality improvement that was passed through Measure B. Additionally, I want to point out one more time that we've been focused on talking about the one-time revenues and one-time expenses, but within the council agenda report, we did do a little financial piece on the ongoing revenues and expenditures that would spin off. Even though this is a 12-month pilot program, as the city attorneys work on the coastal registration and enforcement, the long-term result of that would be coastal STRs being in compliance and paying their business license tax, their TOT and their TBID regularly going forward. So we have some calculations on ongoing revenue that we would be continuing to receive on the coastal STRs, and that's a range of about $150,000 to $320,000 of ongoing revenues. And we base that on some assumptions that we have about 90 coastal STRs that are currently registered. We're hoping that through the 12-month pilot program, we'd get about another 90, so we'd have about 180 roughly coastal STRs registered, giving us that revenue I mentioned a moment ago, ranging from 150 to 320. So that is something to consider as a part of this. Now, on the ongoing piece, of course, the inland STRs are not included in the ongoing because the inland enforcement would, of course, close those down. Okay, and I think that just about wraps up for me. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for the presentation. So now I will open it up to questions from my colleagues. Councilmember Harmon.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate this. Just one question, and maybe I'll just direct it to you, Ms. Connect, because I'm not quite sure who to direct it to, really. But my understanding was that there was a change in state law recently that now allows us to issue relatively large penalties for not following city rules with regards to short-term rentals. So I'm just looking online, which Google is never, as a lawyer, and this is my key source, but it may be wrong. First fine, $1,500, second, $3,000. each subsequent offense $5,000. So I'm wondering whether we factored in the process of issuing penalties prior to either criminal prosecution or the initiation of some kind of effort to come up to a settlement agreement, and why or why not? And then if we do that, wouldn't those fines theoretically go some way to offsetting the expenses? Just wondering if you could speak about that and how that might fit into this process.
Thank you, Councilmember Harmon. I'm going to let Mr. Way address that question first. Thank you.
That's a really good question. Yes, the state legislature did increase administrative fine amounts, so it could be, we can make it higher, right? And the amount you talked about is the increase, the state law gives the city the power to enact. We're going a different route. We're going the criminal route versus the administrative route. And the reason for that is what happened initially in 2015 was they were going just the civil administrative route. And I think they relied a lot on the administrative part of it. And the administrative part of it would, how it would be done is someone's given a warning letter. If they failed to comply, then they're issued an administrative citation. The first offense would be if we increase the administrative fine amount to $1,500, then $3,000, and $5,000, and then they're entitled to appeal it in the Superior Court. And then they will open it up to discovery. So there's going to be depositions. There's going to be interrogatories. There's going to be requests for production of documents. None of these things apply in criminal prosecution. In criminal prosecution, we gather the evidence. We find enough evidence. And then if we have enough evidence, then we can prosecute them. And if we prosecute them, then the punishment for each offense could be up to 6 months in jail and or a fine of $1,000. But you're right, the money for the fine would not go to the city. That fine, the bulk of it would go to the state. But the way the program, sorry?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're saying the bulk of the fine in the event we went with an administrative penalty, that would go to the state rather than the city, or the fine on the criminal side would go to the, okay.
Fine on the criminal
To the
side would go to
courts
this,
and-
would go to the
okay.
courts. Yeah, we would get a very small percentage of the base fine. Yeah. For the administrative fine, if we do collect it, it will go to the city. But the cost of defending that would be higher. And the number of cases we would be able to defend, because it's such a lucrative thing. And if 2015 was some type of guideline, I can anticipate that it would be a costly legal endeavor for these, if we go the administrative process.
And thank you, that's very helpful. Just one quick follow-up on that. When you talk about your baseline expectations with regard to the administrative penalty route, was your experience that the folks that would push back via extensive discovery, I mean, are those STR companies? I mean, I actually find it a little bit hard to believe that an individual who has one STR would choose to litigate a $1,000 penalty, which would be like a way more expensive process for them, right? Would it be legal, I guess is my question, for us to decide based on the type of, or the level of non-compliance we're seeing, whether we want to go the administrative route or if the criminal route is more appropriate? Like, could we pick?
We can. I mean, all three tools, administrative, civil, or criminal, are open to us. And the city attorney, and we all use her power to enforce. We have that discretion to pick one of the three. So we would pick the right tool. And
Based on
that is
Okay.
that is something that, that adds to this, right? If it's something that the council wants us to consider, wants us to implement an element of, that's something that could be added to it. Yeah, we could pick the tools, as long as it's not done arbitrarily. We're doing it to gain compliance. That's the goal. So we can pick the tool that we think is best in order to secure compliance.
Awesome, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Councilmember Harmon, just to add some flavor to what happened in 2015, when we started the enforcement program based upon administrative citations, which you're talking about, I'm going to have Mr. Doimus come up and give a little add flavor to that.
This is speaking from experience, when we had the funding of $170,000, and Mr. Way is extremely correct in terms of the way you're dealing with it. But when I dealt with it, we dealt with the explosion of, like we said in the presentation, these platform listing companies like Airbnb, VBRNO, where in 2009 you may have had a couple thousand worldwide advertisements to now in 2015 millions. And so there's a huge explosion. It was probably happening before in Santa Barbara, but nowhere to the level. And when we did this, we went through the administrative fine route, and then if not, so through civil litigation. And we had administrative hearings, we had challenges from a lot of plaintiffs' attorneys in town. Those cost hours and hours because we would have to contribute staff time to be the hearing officer, the attorney there on that, bring staff to identify and testify into it, and you're dealing with a couple $100 worth of fines. When we're talking about being inefficient and not sufficient, that's exactly what it was. And in 2015, originally we had maybe over 100 settlement agreements to stop. Those were people, I would say the low-hanging fruit in terms of people who really don't want to break any law, are very compliant, are very careful, and they came to the table. But as you see now, we potentially have anywhere, the numbers range from 1,000 to 2,000. That's what we'll find out. So it hasn't curbed it. And so to curb it, the efficient process is what Mr. Way has been conducting, everything else going, through the criminal way. While you're not getting that administrative fines, it allows us to handle a much more voluminous amount in a much more expedient way versus what I experienced before. We just got bogged down over and over again and became a very frustrating process.
Thank you very much. And one last question. If you remember, what were the administrative penalties in 2015?
So the administrative penalties are what we have in the Muni Code right now because
Like
the state
100
law
or
wasn't in, so we would
Yeah.
have to do an amendment to the ordinance. So then it was $100 for first violation, $250. I believe it goes up to $500 now off the top of my head, but that's as high as it would go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dumas. Any questions?
Yes.
Member Gutierrez.
Going to slide 10, can somebody talk about the finance? Would that be Mr.? So where it says contract with private investigators and hourly to gather evidence, the low is if we would keep that in-house?
You want to talk to it? Okay.
So investigators are, as you see from the cost up there, they are the bulk of the program. We didn't put slides on this yet because we are reaching out to other local government agencies that have enforcement programs similar to ours. Most don't. Most are starting to allow them. But one example was New Orleans that has a lot of legal vacation rentals, maybe around 5,000, but they have 2,000 illegal ones. And they have on staff 10 investigators. Honolulu is another city that only allows, kind of similar to us, only allows vacation rentals in the luxury hotel zones and nowhere else in the city. Right now, as they're starting, they have 5 on. So before committing and deciding what we need, we decided to develop this pilot program to allow for hourly. So hourlies, we already have that with the police department when they do background checks, and usually they're paid between $55 to $70 an hour. A lot of times they're CalPERS and Newton's, so we have to be very careful that they don't go over the 960-hour threshold. And so that would be the most cost-efficient way, is to hire several hourlies and giving Mr. Alva giving case files to them, Mr. Wade taking those cases, and working those cases up. And that would be the preferable way because it would be low on cost, allow us to cast a wide array of investigators. If we didn't get enough applications, we would contract with a firm, and those ranges are between, as you see in the report, between $175 and $225 an hour. And so those are just the 2 ways we could do that. Obviously, the investigators need to meet the requirements under the Business Profession Code, and you'll see that with a lot of retired police officers, detectives, everything else like that. So it wouldn't be in-house the first year because it allows us to see, and then we'll see after that first year what would be the best way to go considering the cases. Would it make sense to have 5 in-house investigators, or is it even cheaper to go the hourly route? We'll know much better in terms of and being able to guide and make recommendations a year from now. That's why we want to do the pilot program.
Somebody mentioned about how many cases the city team can handle. And there's a estimate of cracking down on 90 more coastal STRs. Is,
I can take a stab at it because that was based on one of our assumptions on the finance end. So yes, currently there are about 90 coastal STRs that are registered for their business licenses and they're paying their TOTs. And from the information we receive from the vendors, the estimate is there's more than that are not registered, and we're estimating that about 90 more we would get registered through the pilot program through that time period.
so through this pilot program, and I'm just explaining this for the public out there that is tuning in for the first time, I got a lot of emails regarding this issue. So this is a one-time pilot program to give the city an idea of how many STRs are out there that haven't been in compliance, but also to give the city an idea if we need to hire hourly or another staff in the city attorney's office to handle these type of issues.
Thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez. It is both of those things, but it's also to start an enforcement program. So yes, we want to gather the information, and yes, we want to see what kind of staffing needs we need if we want to continue this on as a permanent program, but we also want to start an enforcement program. So all of that together. And, you know, Mr. Way currently prosecutes illegal short-term rentals in both coastal and inland zones, and he can talk about what resources are required to do that now and how many he's currently prosecuting now. So you get some idea of what our current program is and, you know, what we would like to increase by doing this enhanced enforcement program, if that would be
Yes,
helpful to
please,
you.
please.
Sorry, I should have walked here. I couldn't find a better way. Yes, we currently do enforce on illegal short-term rentals, but we rely on CDD to provide us with the investigation. We have cases. We currently have cases. We have been referred cases. I think the last year we were referred about 20 cases. I think we have about 7 or 8, that's a rough estimate, of cases in court right now. So we're actively doing it. What's missing, the component that's missing is code compliance at CDD. Mm-hmm. They're doing the best they can. We've prosecuted and we've acted on every single short-term rental case that they've provided us, but they're only providing us what they can provide us. Mm-hmm. I know that I saw Emil here earlier. He's the code compliance supervisor, and at one point, it was just him and a couple of staff members. And that was it for the entire city, a city close to 100,000 people. And so they're doing their best to give the cases to us. We have enforced on every single case that's given to us. There's one thing I forgot to mention to Councilmember Harmon in her previous question. One of the things we do when we enforce on illegal short-term rentals now is we subpoena the records from Airbnb or VRBO, whatever the platform we find it on, or code compliance finds it on. When we get that information, almost all the time, we find out that they're not remitting TOTs. And so almost all the time, we amend our complaint to allege an additional violation of failure to remit TOTs. And many of the cases that resolve entailed these operators to remit TOTs. And that's something that's a little different from the administrative process, because the administrative process, we're dealing with just a fine. But in the criminal process, we address not only the violation, but we also addressed any failures to pay TOTs.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
And my last question, it's not
Okay.
for you. I don't know if it's for the city administrator or for Mr. DeMartini. Thinking about our city budget, would it be ideal for this pilot program for the finance department to take it in-house with the processing fees?
I can try that, yes.
Yeah.
Committee Member Gutierrez, thank you for that question. Ms. Moss and I do believe that Finance Department staff can process remittances in-house during the pilot program. That will give us the ability to see what that information looks like, how many we're actually talking about, and if we need to make a decision to spin up a portal like we did with the business license tax portal recently and have additional outside consulting services support that at a later time, we can cross that bridge when we get there. But we believe that we can accommodate the low-end estimate on this slide.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. I have a few questions myself. Just to follow up on that, so if we went down that road for the pilot program, it would be more than the 100,000. Would it be about 100,000, or would it be an additional cost because you have that staff time you're factoring in there? To narrow it down for the public more, it's not an option of paying 100 or 450, so it's an easy choice. It's actually, just can you speak to what it would cost to go in-house?
Sure, yes, Chair Friedman. And actually, City Attorney Connect mentioned this a little bit earlier, is that there's a range of options that these consultants offer the city with lots of different services. And so the low end truly is the $100,000, and all of the modules, all of the investigative services, all of the auditing, field work, all of the documentation, all of the customer service. I mean, there's a lot that's involved with these programs, would be up to around $450,000. So if we go with a lower option, it would be somewhere in the middle. It would not be 100, it probably wouldn't be 450, but it would be somewhere in the middle.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And then a question on how the pilot program is going to be funded. Is that coming out of reserves this year?
Yes, Chair Friedman. So this pilot program, as it is presented to the Finance Committee today, is the one-time program would operate in a deficit, right? So it would generate around $315,000 a year, but it would cost close to $1 million. So in order to fund this program, council would be required to appropriate available general fund reserves to operate the program.
And then, since it is technically for this pilot program, it's one time, it's not ongoing yet, because that's why we're doing this, to see what it would take. Any revenue that was created from it, whether it's through fines or back TOT, would go back into the general fund, and then would we plan to try to replenish those reserves somehow through that?
This is Chair Freeman. So there are multiple revenue components for the program. The largest is the transient occupancy tax. That's a general fund tax, so that would come into the general fund. Of course, the 2% of the TOT that goes to Creeks would go to Creeks, and we would explore Creeks paying for their proportional share of the program, since they're going to benefit from it as well. Also, all legal short-term rental operators would have to get a business license, and they would pay their tax, which is very minimal. The T-bid would also be generated as well. And so for the ongoing program, staff would come to you with a recommendation about how to fund it on an ongoing basis, knowing that there will be some level of ongoing TOT that would generate from it, and that's articulated in the staff report to you today. But we'll have to come back with you with more information when it gets time to that, to see truly if it can be self-sustaining.
Okay. And then my last question on the finances, on page 6 of the staff report, it goes into the ongoing, and it just wanted to clarify, there's the revenues and then the expenses, and that would be for if the program was up and running and we've basically gone in and corrected all the illegal STRs, but the total expenses, we just don't know yet, but we would continue to have some type of program in there just in the event that there are new ones that pop up. We wouldn't just end the program, as I understand it.
Yes, Chair Freeman, that is the assumption in that model. That's correct.
Thank you. And then, let me see, just a question, it came up earlier. We don't know how many there are, so we don't know what our staffing capacity is yet. This might be for you, Ms. Connect. So there would be different kinds of STRs that are out there. There's those that are either they're part of a business or they're somebody from out of town, but there might be some that they actually live in their home and a couple weeks a year they rent it out just to pay for their own vacation while they're gone. Would we be able, based on the fact that we have limited resources, be able to prioritize those that are, say, more that are more out there in terms of they're there every single day versus somebody that might be there, a couple weeks a year?
Thank you for that question, Chair Friedman. I don't think we can do that under this program. They're illegal operating STRs. They're illegal operating STRs.
Thank you for that clarification. And then my last question, actually, I think that answered all my questions. So, follow-up question from Member Gutierrez.
Just out of curiosity, Ms. Connect, how much of the bulk of cases that are coming through your office are related to this issue?
Councilmember-
And the reason behind this question is, I get questions from the community member, why are you guys so focused on this issue? And there's so many other issues going on. But I would like for you to explain why this pilot program is really important. So if you can give us a little background information of what the city attorney's office has been seeing since 2015 to now.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Gutierrez. So that was a multi-part question. I'll have Mr. Way answer how many or what the percentage of cases that he prosecutes are related to illegal operating short-term rentals. But in terms of the city attorney's office and the policy considerations here is really a question for the city council to answer. But we have, as you recall, the Community Development Department brought a program to you some months ago to consider a permit type program. And, that was, we heard a lot of responses to that maybe we need to look at enforcement. We do know, and the city attorney's office is very aware that there's a housing crisis in this city. And we do know that one of the things that is amplifying this housing crisis in this city is the proliferation of operating short-term rentals. The only way that we can really get a handle on the number and the scope and try to stem the proliferation of operating short-term rentals and to try to return some of those operating short-term rentals to the long-term available rental market is to address this issue. So that is why we're presenting this program to you today. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Way, where he can talk about what percentage of cases involve short-term rentals out of his total prosecution caseload.
So last year, our prosecution unit handled about over 600 cases. So of course, 20 out of 600 is a small number. Some cases are easily resolved. A lot of the police cases don't. It's the investigation's done. There's not much that needs to be done except for me to prosecute them. Some cases take more time. Some of code compliance cases, substandard buildings, take more time. Illegal short-term rentals take time. It involves not just filing. I have to subpoena the records. I at times have to deal with the attorney for the short-term rental platform, and then I have to deal with defense counsel. Most of the time, there's a defense counsel. So we, like Ms. Connect said, you tell us the priorities, but we are not. All code violations are important to us, and we do our best to address everything. And there is a housing crisis, and we enforce on the just cause eviction ordinance, and we can see what effects it has on everyday people, and we understand the importance of this, and that's, I believe, one of the reasons why this pilot program is being brought forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We're going to move on to public comments. So before I have some in the room here. If you are in the hearing room and you'd like to speak and have not turned in a slip yet, please turn in the slip to Mr. DiMartini. And if you are online and wish to speak, please raise your hand in the app, and I will close any new at 1 o'clock. So if you don't have your hand raised, you need to raise your hand by 1 o'clock online if you would like to speak. So with that, I will start. You'll have 3 minutes. Kathy Janega Dykes, followed by Tiffany Holler, and our final speaker in the room here is Samantha Ireland.
Good afternoon, Chair Friedman, members of the Finance Committee. My name is Kathy Chenega Dykes. I'm President and CEO of Visit Santa Barbara. On behalf of the local leisure and hospitality industry, I am here in support of the concept behind the short-term rental enforcement pilot policy program. And as you may recall from previous presentations and testimony, Visit Santa Barbara's position is to encourage growth that is both well-managed and balances the interests of both our residents as well as our visitors. Enforcement of existing city ordinances and regulations on short-term rental operators is really keeping with this goal. While Visit Santa Barbara represents and we proudly promote the short-term rentals which are legally permitted inside the city, we do not market those short-term rentals that are not following the rules of the road set by this community. Rather, we instead agree with the city staff's assessment that bringing non-permitted STRs into compliance, it's an important process to protect residential housing inventory for long-term renters and owner-occupants. And preserving this balance really improves the housing prospects for vital workers in our industry, including retail, restaurant, lodging, and even non-hospitality employees. It will further ensure a level playing field for legal short-term rentals, hotels, and inns, which really compete to host the visitors within our community. We appreciate the committee's consideration of this detailed pilot program, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Ms. Chenega Dykes. Up next is Tiffany Holler.
Hi, good afternoon, council members, Finance Committee. My name is Tiffany Haller. My husband and I own Haller Coastal Homes, a property management company here in Santa Barbara. And we operate legal, licensed, and tax-paying short-term rentals in the city and the county of Santa Barbara. We've been doing this for over 18 years. I've been to a lot of these hearings, and I'm kind of feeling like this is a little bit of deja vu from 2016, and I know you guys weren't here for that. But that did not turn up any affordable housing. People closed their doors, and they did not rent long-term after. So you just keep that in mind. The goal is housing, and I'm here in favor of an enforcement program, completely, 100%. But I feel like we're missing the boat here. It's flawed. We're going to spend a bunch of money, exorbitant amount of money, like we did before, and we need a more effective solution. Mr. Doimus mentioned Honolulu, the city and county of Honolulu, Bill 41. We were part of that. We own a vacation property in a legal zone in Hawaii. In a matter of a week, those properties were shut down. No money spent. A phone call to VRBO and a phone call to Airbnb requiring them to put the business license, their APN number, and then they were also given all the property addresses instantly overnight, okay? You want to shut it down quick with no expense? Have the government call, city government call Airbnb and VRBO and require this for them to put their license on there. This is where they get their majority of income is from these listing sites. Okay. Other thing is that, yes, it's not an even playing field, but I will say that regulations need to be clear and concise. The city of Santa Barbara is not doing a good service to anybody in the coastal zone or outside the coastal zone right now and telling them this. I'm sorry, city attorney, I forgot your name, but you were talking about a permitting process. There is no permitting process. You can get a business license, but when you go right now to the city in the coastal zone to get a business license, you know what they tell you? They tell you, cancel, that it is unlawful in the city of Santa Barbara, including the coastal zone, unless they are permitted by the city and located in a zoning district allowed for hotels. So this is scaring people. And I said, just proceed, get the license, we'll remit the taxes for you. The city staff, Suzanne Montagna, is sending this letter scaring people in the coastal zone into thinking that what they're doing is illegal. If they think they're doing, if getting the license is illegal, there's no concise permitting process, okay?
Thank you, and your time's up.
sorry, one last thing. I've talked at many of the meetings. I have an answer for the housing crisis. So, and it's through tourism dollars.
Thank you. Up next is Samantha Ireland.
Hello, council members. Finance Committee, I did send you an email just to reiterate for the public listening and also here in case you haven't had a chance to read it. I own and operate Vacation Rentals of Santa Barbara. We've been in business as well for almost 18 years. We have lots of properties, 3/4 of which rent 30 days or longer. They are people's second homes. They are people who want to own in Santa Barbara, and they're not going to sell them, and they're not going to rent them out short term. This enforcement program does not impact them. It does not impact most of my properties. The ones that do rent short term are also legal and do have licenses, and those are the only properties that we represent. I am in favor of an enforcement program. I want you to know that. I am not in favor of my tax dollars at what looks like the minimum being almost $1 million and the maximum being almost $1.5 million going towards this one-year pilot program. I want to ask you, council members, what programs are you going to cut or not approve because you're going to approve this? Are there other programs that are really important to your district folks that they would rather see approved? I'm not saying that we don't need an enforcement program. I think this enforcement program is way too costly. And the way that you can get funds for an enforcement program is to have a reasonable process to be permitted in the areas that are already legal, in those commercial hotel areas, in those coastal zones. As Tiffany Heller just pointed out, and also City Attorney Ms. Connect pointed out, there is almost no way to get a legal permit right now because the process is so arduous. That is why so many people are going under the table. I'm in favor of enforcement. That's going to weed out those people that are renting illegally, and hopefully they'll come and rent my legal ones. That's great. But there's many people that are in those legal areas that are doing it illegally because they can't get through this arduous, almost impossible program, as Ms. Connect pointed out, a very difficult program. So please, let's work on a program that you can get through, makes sense. There's many cities out there that have them. Let's get one that makes sense. Let's get those people in the legal areas who are operating illegally to be able to get through a process, apply for a permit, start paying their TOT taxes, and then let's take that TOT money and enforce. That's what I'm asking. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Ireland, and that concludes our speakers in the boardroom. And now, Ms. Jen, is there any speakers online?
There are currently no hands raised online.
Okay, so last chance to raise your hand if you'd like to speak to this item. And there are no raised hands, so I will close public comment and turn it over to my colleagues for deliberation. Don't all jump at once.
I'll go first. Thank you, Chair Friedman. Thank you to staff. Thanks for everyone who came in to make public comment today. I know this has been just such an ongoing, important issue, a thorn in all our sides for so many different reasons. I have to say, I wholeheartedly support the effort of this pilot program. And while I certainly appreciate the public commenters and agree in a lot of ways, particularly with regards to how prudent we need to be in terms of spending city tax dollars. But this is something that I have heard over and over and over again, not just from residents in my district, but from across the city, how problematic these illegal short-term rentals are. We have tried so many different ways to get a handle on them. I think what you have put together with this program in particular really is just hearing not only from us as a council, but also from the community, how important it is that we figure out a way to manage this and how to solve what has become, in many ways, a really intractable problem. So I very much appreciate that, and I believe that this is an investment worth making, because it's not only an investment into short-term rentals, but also the housing stock in our community. It's an investment into our tourism industry. It's an investment into the legal short-term rentals that are already in existence. This is only going to be a benefit to our community, and I hear loud and clear from our city attorney's office that we have tried more affordable methods. We have tried to invest less, and we have not had the kind of outcomes that we have all been calling for time and time again. So I think that it's time we really put our money where our mouth is and try to solve this problem. So you will absolutely have my wholehearted support to move this forward. But I do just want to make one additional comment, because I can't stop myself. Whenever we have issues of managing municipal compliance, I always have a not insignificant amount of discomfort when we take the criminal prosecution route in the first instance. It is just fundamentally something that I am not philosophically oriented toward, to have criminal prosecution in the first instance be the approach of city government for municipal related infractions. So I am uncomfortable with the criminal prosecution element in the first instance being sort of our the only prong of this program that we have identified. That said, I hear Mr. Way loud and clear saying that the other approach not only has not worked, but has created a huge amount of work for our office and money, and I get that. So I think what I would like, and what I'm requesting, and perhaps our colleagues up here will have something to say about it, or you can ruminate on it before this comes to the full council, but trusting your experience, I support what you have put forward, but would ask that you also come forward with the necessary ordinance adjustments to reflect the increase in administrative fines. So I think Mr. Way or Ms. Connect, someone said we'd have to change the ordinance. Let's do that also, and let's be clear when we put forward this pilot program that you are retaining the ability to take an administrative track when the situation warrants it. And I think for me, trusting in your experience and in your judgment, I have every belief that the city attorney's office knows which tool to use when, but it's really important for me, and I think important for us as a city government, to be clear that we are not looking to criminalize our residents. We are not looking to criminalize our residents who, as Mr. Friedman said, may just be doing this for 2 weeks to try to afford their vacation. You know, this gives an element of balance, allows you to retain your discretion and to use it appropriately, as you always do. So I would just ask that you please consider that as an explicit component of this pilot, to the extent that it's legal and feasible, and that we do move forward to change the ordinance penalties to give you that tool for use when you deem appropriate. And with that, I will be supporting the staff recommendation today.
Great. Thank you for your comments. I'll go next. I want to address your comments before I get into mine. I appreciate where staff's at. I appreciate you raising the issue. And for today's purposes, because I don't know if it's agendized, I'd prefer that we can stick with the staff recommendation. But when it comes to council, if you could provide that additional information. And while you're at it, one of the public commenters, I actually would like some more information too. If the council at the time wanted to amend the ordinance, there is the issue of getting the licenses from Airbnb and VRBO, where in order for someone to post on there, they would have to have their business license. I've talked about that with Mr. Isaacson before. So as long as we're getting more information towards what Councilmember Harmon, I'd like to just get more information on that. But that's not, I prefer not to put that in the ordinance today because I don't know if it's part of what we are voting on. We're voting on the enforcement just today. So with that, good suggestions, and I want to explore that more as well. So first, I want to thank our staff, all the different departments. As everyone can see, it's a team effort. It's not just led by one department. And in the past, we have tried to do enforcement, and there was a time when we would get a lot of public comment at council meetings that we're not doing enforcement. And I think today we demonstrated that the tools we had were just not conducive to be able to enforce with perhaps thousands of vacation rentals when we could only have a capacity of about 20 per year. And we saw today why that is. So this is a way to really come in and actually comply with the ordinance that we have, and which differs from where we were in the fall when we were looking at amending the program. But I think this is a way to go because no matter what ordinance amendments we may or may not make in the future, we still have to have an enforcement component to go along with it. And so this is the approach that staff brought forward so we can test it out as a one-year pilot program and see what works and what doesn't and where there could be cost controls going into the future. So if we understand it, maybe it won't cost this much, but there's too many variables right now in terms of the number of vacation rentals, what it takes in terms of gathering the evidence and all that. So I'm supportive of moving today's enforcement program forward. And again, it is a pilot for this year to gather that information and data. I also support the flexibility given within your department on whether you'd like to pursue the criminal or the administrative or the civil. You said you do have that flexibility, but I would leave that up to your judgment. But I don't want to lock it in that only criminal today, but from what I'm hearing, you would still retain that flexibility to have that if that's something that you were able to achieve going down either the civil or administrative path. And then, next year we'll be revisiting this. I am interested in, once we get more information on what it would cost in an ongoing program. And again, today we're focusing just on the enforcement, and it is time that we had the tools and resources to do that. So I too will be supporting the recommendation today, and then you have the other direction on the additional information outside of it. Member Gutierrez?
I want to thank staff for your great work in presenting this in short-term rental enforcement pilot program. I do also want to thank public comment. I think that your perspective that you bring into this meeting is very valid. I see it in my district where somebody said that there are property owners that will shut their doors, are not going to rent for long-term, and that is a reality. So thank you for bringing that up. But like public comment said, and what we've seen here in council is that we do need a program in place, and what better way to start it as a pilot program. But since this will be moved to council, I really would like to encourage the community and those that spoke today to at least to speak to me or to any of my colleagues how exactly would an ideal pilot program look like. But we do need a program, so I will be supporting this to be moved to the council at large, and I just want to thank everybody for their work.
So is there a motion for the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
And any objections, abstains, none, voted unanimously, approved. And with that, anything else, Mr. DiMartini? I always like to check, just in case.
Thank you for checking. All good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and this meeting is adjourned.